Hey everyone, it's Vivi, and let's talk about Ratchet Clank Into the Nexus. Mainly, let's focus on Vendra and Neftin Prog. Now these guys, they're nethers. These two, they were sent to Ratchet's dimension by their parents, we believe, out of fear of Mr. I, the leader of the nethers in the Netherverse. And how was this possible? It was possible due to temporal disruptions, by Vendra's words. The walls were thin enough to at least allow Mr. I to communicate with Vendra and Neftin. Not all nethers were able to come through, but some did. As for the CEO of Polaris Industries, he explains that the Great Clock's explosion is what caused these nether rifts to appear. Now I know the words sound different, I'll discuss about this later. Vendra and Neftin were found at a very young age, in the caves of planet Yerick. With that, they got orphaned at the Miro Orphanage on planet Yerick. When exploring the orphanage, Ratchet comes across a few audio journals left behind by Vendra over the years, when she used to be on that planet. Vendra's experience at the orphanage, well, for Neftin as well, it wasn't good. Going by her words, I mean, she called them bullies. A time comes where both Vendra and Neftin find Mr. I deep within the caves of their orphanage, able to communicate with them. But Mr. I explains, the duo, that they can't live in the Netherverse, due to their bodies becoming too used to Ratchet's dimension. Vendra missing her home and family after what Mr. I revealed to them being nethers, she thought of bringing her family to Ratchet's dimension. Why not, instead of going home, bring home to them, Mr. I and the nethers, to this dimension, by studying transdimensional tunneling and quantum mechanics. She really thought of this at a young age, according to the audio journals. Neftin basically wanted to support his sister, be her guardian. He went along with it all these years. We believe Vendra even made technology for her brother Neftin throughout the years. It could be possible Mr. I gave them some sort of tools, maybe scrap they found lying around due to their transdimensional studying and all. We at least know that Vendra created the Nether Blades and Prog Blades when upgraded. Vendra through the years just became very cold-hearted, even mean to her brother. You can even see a bunch of drawings underground at the orphanage depicting her change in nature the more she came into contact with Mr. I. Talwyn at the beginning of Into the Nexus went on to say she's cold and empty, unlike anyone they've ever encountered before. People call her a space witch. Powers, telepathic powers, we can believe was given by Mr. I. Now brother and sister realize they need more room to advance their research eventually. They decide to scare away the citizens of the Zarkov sector, primarily planets Yerick and Psylocke. By using their knowledge of transdimensional tunneling, what better way to scare away citizens than by using transdimensional tech? Use the nethers to spook them away. Not all nethers, as I said before, were able to pass through at first. The ones that mainly made it through were the tiny ones, without protective gear. They explode, making it seem like the planets are haunted. Because of that whole ordeal, Galactic President of Polaris had everyone abandon the sector. Mayor of Planet Psylocke just failed to protect the planet, so everyone just got evacuated. With that, Vendra and Neftin use all of that empty space to further study their transdimensional tunneling. Later on, they come to realize there's a device called the Dimensionator. They try and steal the original one from the Intergalactic Museum of History by stealing a Torbot named Docent 427. They realize the museum is too heavily guarded. They decide to make their own. I'm not sure if you remember or ever heard of a Ratchet Clank mobile game titled Before the Nexus. It was released back on December 18, 2013. It was believed to have been promotional material for Into the Nexus. And by the way, yes, this mobile game was released before Into the Nexus. It was developed by Darkside Game Studios, published by Sony. It's this endless runner game. As for the reviews, it's pretty mixed. If you're wondering if it still works on your current iOS or Android device, it does. And it is free. It does have some in-app purchases for bolts and stuff, but yeah, that's about it. For those of you who are skeptical in terms of whether or not this game is canon to the story, well, two things. Published by Sony is one, and two, the game would allow you to sync all the raritanium you collected with your PS3 game, according to the description you find for this mobile game. The story of it is basically the moment the Progs abducted CEO of Polaris Industries, or call it the assault at Polaris Industries, that brief scene we get at the beginning of Into the Nexus. There is also the mention of Fleabar Snuttleblast in this mobile game. He's another Terracnoid, don't get him confused with Pollux. I'm guessing they ended up abducting the CEO afterwards. Perhaps he proved to be more useful. They wanted him, Pollux, to create a knockoff Dimensionator. So at the end of Before the Nexus, Ratchet and Clank capture only Vendra. Neftin, along with the thugs for less he hired, they all escape, and also abduct Pollux. And pretty much the story continues into the Nexus. So about Vendra. She gets a life sentence to the Vartax detention facility eventually. She was first kept into cryosleep on the Nebulox 7 prison ship in the maximum security containment cell for 6 months. She thought she had slept for like 2 weeks, but no, it was 6 months. And she wasn't happy about that. Neftin, with the help of Thugs for Less and all the muscle he hired through those 6 months, they all invaded the ship. They take Vendra with them, they escape, and that also leads to the death of Kronk and Zephyr. Ratchet and Clank go after the two, they end up on planet Urek. They see it, Neftin eventually used a knockoff Dimensionator, created by Pollux, who was still kept active all this time, working on the device. Some Nether warriors came through, but not enough of a big hole to cause Mr. I to come through. Eventually, they encounter on Psylocke. Psylocke being a planet where they believe the walls would be thin enough to allow Mr. I to come through. She uses their knockoff Dimensionator on that planet, despite what Ratchet told Vendra, that bringing Mr. I will cause the galaxy chaos. She even tried justifying her actions by comparing her situation to Ratchet's situation. Why? Because it's family. She's just doing this for family. It wasn't outright explained that way, but it was implied in this scene. She's too stubborn, she doesn't listen, she decides to bring in Mr. I, only to later realize she was no longer needed. She gets tossed into the Netherverse. And why did Mr. I do that? I believe it's simply because he didn't want to deal with Vendra, this whole family thing. Mr. I's intention was just to take over Ratchet's dimension. He didn't care about Vendra. She was just a pawn. Later on, Neftin believes his best chance at finding her is Ratchet, and even stopping the Nethers. He told Ratchet that you need Vendra to do so. They meet on planet Thram. Ratchet decides to make a deal, help Vendra, in exchange of these two turning themselves in. Ratchet and Clank, they find the real Dimensionator at the museum by using the Torbot they stole a long time ago, and yeah, they get the Dimensionator, Neftin fixes it, but the Nethers start fearing it. They come outside of the museum and try to destroy it. Clank, after, saves Vendra using the new tech Pollux infused Clank with back on Urek, transdimensional technology, and afterwards Neftin and Vendra have their brother and sister moment, and then they go to jail, following their deal. In another separate canon called Ratchet and Clank Reimagining or Ratchet and Clank 2016, Neftin Prog is mentioned by Quark, who's a space criminal who tried making citizens of Aradia colorblind twice. We don't have much info on that when it comes to the 2016 game. Now, back to what I said in the beginning about the whole explosion situation. Okay, let's go. There's a little confusion going on in terms of how something was worded in Into the Nexus. The explosion of the Grey Clock, explained by Pollux. What explosion? When did it explode? Are we talking about the explosion caused by Azimuth in A Crack in Time? No, and here's why. Keyword on planet Psylocke by Vendra. They waited 20 years to reunite with the Nethers, their so-called family. Parents aside, of course. 20 years ago or so, they were brought to Ratchet's dimension thanks to the Nether Rifts. The Crack in Time's clock explosion by Azimuth was just a couple of years back. We can't say Azimuth's doing is what caused these two to end up here. These two events don't connect in the timeline, they don't coincide. Let me bring up some questions that were tweeted to TJ Fixman, writer of the Future Saga by user Blue Knight. Hi TJ Fixman, I had a question about the Ratchet and Clank Future Saga for A Crack in Time and Into the Nexus. Great games. So both ITN and the Ratchet Wiki mention that the Great Clock exploded during A Crack in Time's present year, but I don't recall it in-game. What does it mean? What about Nethers? You got me. Sounds like someone is taking creative liberties with the wiki. Oh, I see now, thanks. So it didn't happen in A Crack in Time. But what about Pollux's line from ITN? These dimensional rifts were created long ago by the explosion of the Great Clock. Is this implying the hiccup in the space/time continuum the Fongoids caused? The rifts? Yes. But they didn't create the dimension, and I don't consider what happened to the Great Clock exploding. It was damaged, but remained intact. Hope that answers your question. Alright, one thing's for sure. The Nether Rifts, which allowed Neftin and Vendra to come into Ratchet's dimension were caused by the Fongoids' misuse of time travel. That's been confirmed. Alright, if it wasn't clear, I mean, here's the confirmation. The wiki states this. I find it very weird. Remember, the wiki page, it's not always facts. A lot of them are assumptions, especially when it comes to timelines. The explosion of the Great Clock in the far future, year 5360, caused a hiccup in the time-space continuum to occur eons before that year, creating the Netherverse. The way they go at it, the explanation on Wiki. The explosion, I'm assuming, is azimuth in a crack in time. I mean, that was an explosion. That caused the hiccup in the past. And quote-unquote created the Netherverse? The person was probably implying it opened the Netherverse, or maybe they were thinking it created the Netherverse. But going by this info, Neftin and Vendra suddenly pop into the past, grow up and pop into the future? It's a whole layer of confusion. I personally don't believe that's what happened. At least that's not how I understood it. If you believe that's the case, please explain so in the comments. I'm really curious to know what you think about it. Funny thing is, TJ Fixman doesn't even consider the clock exploding, and yet Polaris says it in ITN. Now look, I've had this question in mind for a while. You're probably gonna laugh, okay? Did the clock exist already before the Fongoids misused their gift? What I mean by this is, was it there this whole time and simply fixed the major mess caused by the Fongoids, which would explain the explosion? Or was it built solely to repair what the Fongoids did? All the celestial entities destroyed, the paradoxes and all that. Well, apparently, I've been unaware of a cutscene this whole time. Yes, go ahead and laugh. Like, I don't remember this scene. Like, why? How did I forget this scene? Orvis explains that the clock was built to fix what the Fongoids did. The error they did. How they abused time travel. I can't believe I forgot about this scene. But, this whole explosion thing, Polaris used it to explain the rifts. Okay. But these rifts happened before the clock was built. I mean, if we go by TJ Fixman's word, the rifts, yes, their abuse caused nether rifts to appear. But then we have the word explosion, which caused nether rifts to appear. Okay, so what is this whole deal with this explosion? Only thing I can think of is the Great Clock exploding. It's been an ongoing rumor among citizens. Didn't Caden, Ratchet's father, theorize the clock? The Great Clock, since it was very mysterious, it could be highly likely Polaris was just going by a rumor. And if we go back to Vendra's words in the beginning, temporal disruptions. And with those words, Ratchet goes on and says, oh, the Great Clock, quickly connecting the whole temporal disruptions to the Great Clock. You know what? I actually have two scenarios. One would be, it's a rumor that the clock exploded and caused nether rifts to appear, which wasn't really what happened. All these rifts happened prior to the clock's construction. Or two, yes, they built the Great Clock to fix their mess, but at the same time, the mess was so huge that it caused an explosion. I mean, it doesn't sound far-fetched if we combine all the words we hear in Into the Nexus, right? But anyways, I'm gonna leave it at that. I would really love to hear your own thoughts on this whole explosion situation. I like to see how you explain it. Alright, so leave everything in the comments, and yeah, I've been Vivi, and thank you for watching.